think you've moved on. But then why do you feel empty when everything seems fine? Why does affection scare you? And why do you sabotage yourself exactly when things start going well?
In this video, you'll understand why childhood traumas don't disappear. They disguise themselves. They hide in the body, in relationships, even in the choices you think you're making freely. Sometimes what shapes who we become is not what we lived, but what we never had. Trauma doesn't always leave visible marks. It becomes a habit of silence, a fear of trust, an emptiness that adulthood tries to fill in vain. And the cruelest part is that you can live for decades without realizing that you're acting from wounds that were never named. Today, we're going to talk about that, but not with ready-made phrases. This video is not a lesson. It's a mirror, and maybe, for the first time, you'll see the child that still lives inside you and is still waiting to be heard. Subscribe now, turn on the bell, and comment below. Is there a part of your childhood you've never had the courage to tell anyone about? Let's get into the video. The image we have of childhood trauma is usually violent, yelling, abuse, physical aggression. But that's only the surface. Most traumas that silently shape adult life didn't come from what happened, but from what never did. Not from excess, but from absence. From the affection that was missing, the gaze that never came, the presence that never truly made itself felt. How can something so invisible leave such deep marks? Because the human being, especially in the first years of life, doesn't survive on food and shelter alone. We survive on bonding, on affection, on emotional connection. When that fails, the body stays alive, but something in the soul begins to die, slowly. John Bowlby, British psychiatrist and father of attachment theory, demonstrated that the bond between a child and their primary caregiver is the foundation for their entire emotional structure. If that relationship is secure, the child learns that the world is trustworthy and that they have value. If that relationship is unstable, absent, or frightening, the child grows up with a brain wired for vigilance, constant doubt, fear of abandonment, and a desperate search for validation. And the cruelest part is that this programming doesn't go away with time. It becomes an emotional pattern. The frightened child becomes the adult who can't relax even when everything is fine, as if they're always waiting for the floor to disappear. According to Bowlby, the type of attachment formed in childhood, whether secure, avoidant, ambivalent, or disorganized, becomes the person's internal working model. This means that even after the caregivers are gone from your life, it's as if they're still living inside you. The way you love, the way you trust, the way you fight, the way you defend yourself, all of it may simply be a reenactment of an emotionally unstable childhood. Children with insecure attachment often learn that, to keep love, they must hide who they are. So they stay silent, they shapeshift, they disappear. And years later, they can't understand why they feel like they have to earn love all the time. Bessel van der Kolk, psychiatrist and global reference in trauma studies, goes further. He shows that early trauma doesn't just affect emotions and behavior, it reconfigures the brain's very biology. The nervous system of a child subjected to chronic stress or emotional neglect enters a constant state of alert. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, becomes hyperactive. The hippocampus, which organizes memory, loses its stability. The whole body learns that the world is a hostile place, and even in adulthood, this system keeps sounding alarms. Even when there's no real threat, it's like living with an invisible fire inside, burning silently behind a seemingly calm face. And it doesn't stop there. Van der Kolk explains that early trauma compromises the development of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulating emotions, planning actions, and managing impulses. In other words, a childhood marked by emotional insecurity doesn't only affect how you feel, it affects how you think, choose, and relate. It's not rare for adults who went through this to label themselves as too anxious, explosive, disconnected, or coldly rational. But these aren't personality flaws. They're scars from a childhood where a feeling was dangerous, where overthinking was the only way to survive the incomprehensible. Maybe that's why many adults with a history of relational trauma show symptoms that seem disconnected from childhood: chronic pain, social phobias, compulsions, repetitive self-sabotage. And when they seek help, they often hear that the problem is all in their head. But as van der Kolk states, trauma is not just psychological. It's physical, neurological, and sensory. It's in the body that flinches when someone gets too close. In the heart that races when tenderness is felt. In the stomach that tightens when affection is received. It's the body screaming what the mind couldn't say. And there's another devastating detail. The traumatized child never concludes that the adult was wrong. They conclude that they are the problem. This is the most painful core of childhood trauma. The bond is so essential for survival that if love doesn't come, the brain prefers to believe that something is wrong with itself. If my mother doesn't look at me, it's because I'm unworthy. If my father ignores me, it's because I'm too much. This belief slowly seeps in and becomes identity. You don't just think you were rejected. You start to believe you deserve rejection. The child grows up, becomes an adult, achieves things, has friends, but deep inside, still carries a hole that was never named. The trauma no one saw keeps shaping decisions, loves, fears, and silences. That's why this kind of pain doesn't simply go away with time, because it's not in the past. It's in the present, in how you see yourself, in what you expect from others, and in how you treat your own heart. Trauma that goes unrecognized becomes fate, and unless it's acknowledged, it will keep repeating, like an echo from a childhood no one ever heard. There is a dangerous illusion in thinking that what is not remembered does not exist. That if the mind erased it, then it's gone. But the body never forgets. It is the first journal where childhood was written, with tremors, tension, diffuse pain. When pain is too great to be understood, it doesn't disappear. It hides. And where it finds no words, it finds muscles. It finds skin. It finds symptoms. You don't remember what happened when you were 3 years old, but your body remembers exactly what it felt when it was ignored. And that memory changes everything, without asking for permission. Bessel van der Kolk, author of the classic The Body Keeps the Score, states that trauma is not just an event in time, but a rupture in the body's perception system. The nervous system of a traumatized child collapses. The brain, instead of integrating the experience, fragments it. Emotions dissociate from sensations. Memories become scattered, sensory, sometimes completely inaccessible to the rational mind, but not to the body. That's why so many adults live with chronic pain, insomnia, anxiety attacks, panic collapses, and have no idea why. According to Peter Levine, creator of somatic experiencing, trauma is not in the event itself, but in what happens inside the body when there is no way out. When the child cannot fight nor flee, they freeze. And that energy, which had no way of being expressed, the cry that was swallowed, the scream that was silenced, the movement that was restrained, all of it remains frozen in the nervous system. And frozen, it begins to rot. It doesn't become forgetfulness. It becomes symptom. It becomes reactivity. It becomes an emotional bomb that explodes when the right trigger appears, even if you don't know where it came from. These triggers are not always logical. A smell, a tone of voice, a phrase, a silence, something banal to others. But inside you, it sets off the alarm, and you react with anger, with fear, with flight, with dissociation. Sometimes you don't even understand what you're feeling. You just know you need to get out of there, that it's too much. But what is this too much? It's the child inside you, reliving something that was never processed. It's the body saying, this has happened before, and it hurt. Even if the mind doesn't remember, the body behaves as if it were yesterday. That's why so many people have emotional outbursts that seem disproportionate. They're not just reacting to the present. They are reacting to the accumulation, to the echo of everything that was silenced. The boss who raises their voice can trigger the same fear the child felt in front of the authoritarian father. The partner who withdraws can reopen the wound of the emotionally unavailable mother. It's not about the other. It's about the bodily memory of abandonment. It's about the memory that never became story, and therefore keeps returning as urgency. And the most tragic part is that this cycle perpetuates itself silently, because often the trauma survivor blames themselves. believes they are too dramatic, too sensitive, broken. But as van der Kolk says, trauma doesn't break, it fragments. And those pieces are not flaws, they are survival strategies. They are parts of you that did what they could to keep you alive when no one else did. Understanding this is not victimhood, it's self-recognition. It's pulling the pain out of the dark. Healing, at this point, does not begin with explanations. It begins with presence, with the simple act of feeling safely what was once unbearable. A light tremor, a cry that finally comes out, a spontaneous gesture. The body needs permission to complete what was interrupted. Peter Levine teaches that it's not necessary to relive the trauma to heal it. It's enough to allow the body to feel that now it's different, that today there is space, support, time, that today the danger has passed. This reconnection does not happen in a day, but every time you listen to your body without judgment, every time you welcome a reaction without shame, every time you choose not to silence what you feel, you begin to dissolve the knot that childhood tied. You are not exaggerating. You are, perhaps for the first time, feeling what you once could not. And that is already an act of healing, a step toward your own story, rewritten not to erase what hurt, but to free the one who survived. Comment below. I welcome my inner child. If from today on you choose to stop running from pain and start taking care of yourself the way you always deserved. If childhood trauma is not healed, it doesn't disappear. It disguises itself. It grows with the person, changes form, but remains there. The pain that was never felt turns into behavior. The fear that couldn't be named becomes a choice. The wounded child continues to live inside the adult, wearing masks that protect them, but also imprison them. That's how trauma silently starts writing the chapters of adult life. And the cruelest part, often, the person doesn't realize they're repeating. They believe they're choosing, when in fact, they're obeying an old script they never even questioned. John Bowlby said that attachment doesn't end in childhood, it only changes scenery. What starts in the caregiver's arms continues to unfold in romantic relationships, friendships, in the workplace. A child who learned they couldn't trust those who were supposed to protect them often becomes an adult who fears intimacy, who gets close, but pulls away, who craves love, but self-sabotages, who longs for comfort, but stays silent before asking. And none of that is rational. It's instinctive. It's the body saying, the last time you opened up, you got hurt. Be careful. Many adults confuse trauma with weakness, with emotional fragility. But trauma, as Judith Herman says in Trauma and Recovery, is not a flaw, it's an adaptation. The child learned to silence themselves to avoid rejection, learned to mold themselves to be accepted, learned to hide the pain to keep belonging. And that adaptation became a habit. Today, they avoid conflict even when they should speak up. They tolerate the intolerable, afraid of seeming too much. They laugh when uncomfortable. They flee when someone sees them for real, because being seen, in the past, was the beginning of abandonment. How many times have you asked yourself why you keep repeating the same emotional mistakes? Why you always choose the same type of person? Why you feel trapped in a cycle of emotional sabotage? The answer may lie in your story, not your choice. Trauma creates familiarity with pain. What hurts, but is known, often feels safer than what heals, but is new. That's why some people cling to what destroys them, because the traumatized brain doesn't seek what is good. It seeks what is predictable, even if it costs emotional health. These patterns aren't always obvious. Sometimes, trauma hides behind behaviors that society even applauds. Perfectionism, hyperproductivity, the endless pursuit of recognition. But behind all that, there is often a child who learned that they only deserve affection if they are excellent, that they will only be accepted if they never make a mistake, that they will only be loved if they are useful. And so life becomes a never-ending marathon, where rest feels like guilt and affection becomes debt. This is the kind of pain no one sees, because it disguises itself as virtue. In other cases, trauma shows up as a block, difficulty in forming bonds, fear of surrender, constant distrust, even when love is present. The person pulls away before they can get hurt, shuts down before they're disappointed, and believes they're protecting themselves, when in truth, they're isolating. That's what Bowlby called disorganized attachment strategies, defense mechanisms that were born to guarantee emotional survival, but in adulthood, prevent the growth of healthy bonds. The most devastating part is that when these patterns repeat, the person starts blaming themselves. Why am I like this? Why can't I love properly? Why do I always feel wrong? The pain of trauma becomes shame, and shame silences even more. But as Gabor Mate says, you are not broken. You are adapted to a reality that required you to hide. That sentence changes everything, because it lifts the weight of guilt and opens space for care. It turns judgment into understanding. And understanding is the first step toward healing. Understanding that adult life is often the unresolved continuation of childhood is not a sentence. It's a liberation. Because if what you feel today is the result of an old script, that means it can be rewritten. The child who stayed silent can now be heard. The part of you that learned to protect itself can, little by little, learn to trust. And the patterns that hold you back can become bridges to something new. But for that, you need courage. The courage to look back, not to relive the pain, but to say, I see you, and now I am here. Pain only begins to heal when it stops being a riddle. As long as it remains unnamed, it is only confusion, a weight without origin, an anguish that grows without explanation. But when pain gains language, something changes. It's as if a long-silenced part of you could finally say, it was real. Trauma doesn't need to be grand to be legitimate. It only needed to have been too much for the child you were. And if no one recognized it before, maybe the first person to do so now has to be you. For years, we've been taught to measure pain by comparison. But others had it worse. At least I had a roof over my head. My parents did the best they could. And all of that might be true, but it doesn't invalidate what was missing. Pain is not a competition. It's a fingerprint. What marked you, marked you. And as long as you keep calling drama what was actually emotional abandonment, relief will never come. Validation is the first step toward healing, not the end of it. To validate is to say, that hurt, and I wasn't prepared to handle it. Bessel van der Kolk argues that naming trauma activates areas of the brain responsible for language and emotional self-regulation. In other words, when you're able to talk about what you went through, the brain stops treating it as a current threat and starts storing it as memory. And then, finally, the body can relax. The problem is that many of us were never given permission to speak. We grew up in environments where feeling too much was shameful, where showing pain was seen as weakness. And so, even as adults, we keep quiet. We keep hiding pain beneath reason. But there are tools that help break this cycle. EMDR therapy, for example, developed by Francine Shapiro, uses bilateral stimulation, such as eye movements, to reprocess traumatic memories. It's not about erasing the past, but reorganizing it. The patient revisits the memory, but this time in a safe body in the present moment, and that reconfigures the brain. The trauma that once overwhelmed everything begins to lose power. The memory remains, but the panic fades. It's as if the nervous system says, now it's different. Peter Levine, in turn, teaches that the body needs to complete the movement that was interrupted. A stifled cry, a held-back gesture, a flight that was never possible. All of that leaves an energetic charge trapped in the system. And that charge needs to be released. Not in the form of drama, but of liberation. Sometimes it's a tremor. Sometimes an unexpected sob. Sometimes it's simply the ability to breathe deeply without fear. Healing, in these cases, doesn't require intellectual understanding. It requires bodily permission. The body doesn't want to relive the trauma. It wants to end the story. But perhaps the most powerful and most overlooked step is inner listening. Richard Schwartz, creator of internal family systems therapy, states that we all have parts inside us. Some of them carry pain, others became protectors, and none of them are bad. The part that shuts down is trying to protect you. The part that explodes is trying to defend you. The part that feels too much is crying out for help. When you begin to dialogue with these parts without judging them, something changes. You stop attacking yourself and begin to care for yourself. You begin to build a new bond with your own self. That's where reconnection begins. It's not magic. It's slow, gradual, real. You begin to realize that you are not alone inside yourself, that there is a child there, yes, but also an adult who can hold that child. The same presence you didn't have in the past, you can offer now. And this is not cheap self-help. It's neuroscience applied to life. The brain, when it feels emotional safety, begins to rewire its patterns. As van der Kolk says, feeling safe with another person is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Naming what hurt, allowing the body to finish what was interrupted, stopping the fight against parts of yourself that only wanted to survive, validating without comparing, welcoming without judging. These are not shortcuts, they are steps. And each step is a whisper that says, you're not overreacting. You're just finally feeling what you couldn't before. The pain may not disappear, but it stops ruling. And in that space that opens up, you can finally begin to choose, not based on fear, but based on presence. Because now you are here, and that is already a beginning. You cannot go back in time. You cannot place love where there was silence, nor embrace where there was absence. But you can, and this is immense. Transform the present into fertile ground where your story can be viewed with dignity. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. It is in that space that your story begins to be rewritten, not as a denial of what hurt, but as a way of giving meaning to what was lived. Pain without meaning paralyzes, but pain that finds meaning transforms. Philosophies like those of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche remind us of something essential. We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to do with it. Life is not determined by trauma, but by the way we look at it. And that doesn't require heroism. It requires humanity. It requires recognizing that there are parts of us still stuck in the past, but that wait patiently for a gesture of care. And sometimes, that gesture begins with something as simple as breathing without haste, feeling without censorship, telling yourself, I am here now, and this is different. Reconnection is not an event, it is a process. And each person finds their own path. For some, it is psychotherapy. For others, it is the body in motion. Dance, yoga, a silent walk. For many, it is art. Writing, painting, singing, screaming where before there was only silence. Spirituality, when free of guilt and dogma, can also be a path, not as a ready-made answer, but as a space where the mystery of pain finds shelter. The opposite of trauma may not be exactly healing, as we usually think, but reconnection with the body, with the truth, with others, with the present moment. Richard Schwartz proposes a powerful image. We are not broken, we are divided. And parts of us are still fighting to survive in a world that has already passed. We don't need to defeat them, but to listen to them. Every time you hear your anger without hating yourself, every time you welcome your sadness without rushing, every time you respect your fear without shame, you are, in practice, becoming the adult the child once needed. This is the silent miracle of healing, when the care that was missing begins to come from within. The wounded child who survived inside you doesn't need to disappear. They need to be welcomed. They are not getting in your way. They are waiting to be heard. Maybe healing is not a place you arrive at, but an act of continuing, one day after another. Continuing to live even knowing where it hurt. Continuing to walk even with scars. Continuing to breathe even when memory tightens. Because the truth is, you survived. And now you can choose to live. If you're tired of being used and want to transform your self-esteem from the inside out, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Let's continue together on this journey of awakening and personal power through the eternal lessons of philosophy. Some think this was the end, but be careful. The war is not over yet. There are still things left unsaid. These two videos in front of you are not here by accident. One of them talks about an invisible pattern that may explain why you sabotage yourself exactly when things start going well. But I won't say which one. You'll have to risk the click. So, which one will you choose?